In today's concrete play, I'd like to talk about responding to randomness. I've talked about randomness before, like what are the kinds of randomness, and how does the human brain think of randomness, but I've never really talked about why you'd use randomness in the first place. That's what we're going to talk about now. Outside of cell phone games, the most common kind of randomness is combat randomness, like you got a 50% chance to hit, or whatever. Why do we do this? What is the advantage of using randomness in combat? Well, it's a tension engine. If the roll goes well, then the player is overjoyed. And if the roll goes poorly, then the player is sad. But more than that, if the roll goes well, tension is released. And if the roll goes poorly, tension is increased. Because whatever threat you're trying to deal with, it's either dealt with or it's now a real problem. Because of that contextual result, whatever happens next has that in the past and in the future. You can think about what's going to happen afterwards. So that means that if things go poorly, you have to think about, well, next time, how are things going to go? And after that, how do things go? And after that, how do things go? And so, in essence, what we've got here is a story where we have a rise in tension and a fall in tension and a spike in tension and a sudden tension release. If the system is balanced relatively well, you get a lot of this tension winding and unwinding without any sort of input from the dev. Obviously, the dev can build this stuff on their own. You can build a combat with no randomness that has a tension buildup and tension release and feels good and rolls nicely. But with the randomness, in theory, you can do it much easier. You have to just kind of control the overall flow and make sure it's balanced, and then the tension will automatically sort itself out. That's the theory. Let's talk about how it works in practice. The XCOM series is renowned for its legendary randomness, and most of that is hyperbole because people are not very good at actually remembering things the right way. But we will talk about it and why people might misunderstand it and so on and so forth, right? So this is a grid-based game where you have some soldiers and you got some aliens and they shoot at each other. That's an alien. So what happens is when you got like a 50% chance to hit and you hit, the alien goes away and you're like, yeah. And when you miss, you're like, oh no, the alien's still there and he's going to attack me. But the point of this game isn't any given hit. It's how the combat unfolds. When combat starts, you get to place your characters on a grid, and then you get like a turn or two of moving them around before you even find an enemy, right? So what you're doing is you're preparing your fallback plans. If you miss this shot, what happens then? Do you have another character that can take a shot? Do you have a character on Overwatch? Are you exposed? Are you overextended? What is your setup so that when you inevitably fail, you don't die? And similarly, if you succeed, how are you going to roll forward with this momentum? Where are you going to go next? Don't overextend. You're going to end up turning that success into a failure if you end up missing the next shot and you're overextended. This giant mess is why XCOM remains compelling to this day, and it's why people really enjoy this game despite its incredible randomness. And when you rage quit XCOM because you failed to hit with that 90% success chance, you kind of come back after a while because you're like, well, that was kind of my fault. I didn't plan it well enough. I could have done it better. If only Jolene had been 2 blocks further right, then she could have hit with that Overwatch. I could have planned out my fallback plan a little bit better. I could have structured my array of soldiers a little bit better. Maybe I should have sent a different kind of soldier on that mission. You don't really feel like the randomness just kind of screwed you over. You feel like the randomness is part of the game and you screwed up by not having enough planning to deal with it. This has been fading recently, though. The newest XCOM releases have really, really toned down on this sort of structure, and instead they're more about randomness and forced play, and it's not really my thing. I don't really enjoy it that much, and more importantly, I don't think that it allows the player to react very well to the randomness inherent in that kind of combat system. For example, the most recent release is Chimera Squad, which is an XCOM 2 release. It's just a small add-on game that uses all of the same assets. And you play as a squad of, some humans and some aliens trying to do various things. It's very much inspired by a game called Shadow Watch, which, if you haven't played, you should go play it. It's like $5 on GOG. It's fine. And these are interesting because Shadow Watch has almost no randomness, almost none. And Chimera Squad has all of the randomness of XCOM 2, but none of the planning. Because when you get in a combat in Chimera Squad, you immediately do a breach. And what a breach is it puts you in the middle of a giant pack of aliens. And you get half a turn where you get to sort out which aliens you want to prioritize shooting, and then you're in the middle of combat. There's really no maneuvering ahead of time. There's no setting up a plan. There's no responding to a botched shot because you don't really have any other options. You've just got 4 half turns, and then you are done. And this really, I'm not going to say it's bad, but it's not really allowing the randomness to breathe. You're not really letting the player plan out their assault and then arrange their soldiers to minimize, damage after the fact. You're just kind of throwing them in the meat grinder, which sounds fun, sounds tense. Oh my gosh, it's going to just be endless fighting. That's not really what randomness is good at. So that's at least my opinion. You feel free to go test it out on your own and see. The idea that randomness is something we have to plan for is at the heart of most randomnesses, not all. If you're on a cell phone, then the most common kind of randomness is gotcha randomness, where you just get a random roll, a random pull from some giant stack, and if it's a good one, you feel good. Yay! And if it's a bad one, you don't feel anything because you get another one tomorrow. This is, it's fine for gotcha games. Clearly it's working because they make money, or made money, hand over fist. But I can't help but feel that the lack of the ability to plan ahead and respond properly really negates how much tension there is out of this. You don't get a story out of a gotcha pull. But the main reason you don't get a story out of a gotcha pull is because you can't respond to a gotcha pull. If you get what you want, then sure, you'll spend a couple of seconds rearranging your party or whatever. But basically, there's no follow-up. There's no planning for the next gotcha pull. There's no, how can I maximize my chance of doing well? There's no, I pulled poorly, now I'm going to have a rough time. It's just an endless roll. And that's because the point of a gotcha pull is not to create or release tension. It's to be a gambling addiction. This is a completely different kind of randomness to me. I don't like this kind of randomness nearly as much. We can talk about, maybe there might be ways to make gotcha more interesting or whatever, but at its heart, when you're thinking about randomness, you need to make sure that when you're using randomness, you use it as efficiently as possible. And that means, in most cases, using it as a helper to help you create and release tension. If you're not releasing tension or you're not creating tension, then maybe you're not using the randomness as well as you could be. And that does involve planning. That does involve letting the player take a result and feed it back into itself and figure out what kind of way they want to move forward and how they're going to, respond to the next event and plan ahead for it. If that doesn't exist, then you're not really getting the most out of your randomness. You're kind of using it half-assedly. At least in my opinion. You can let me know what you think in the comments below.